All right, welcome to the Tribulation Day 108. The world continues to spiral downwards into chaos. Hurricane Irene came and went. Massive flooding across New England, which is not only destroying, people's property, but it's also destroying a lot of crops. And, as a whole, the United States has had a mess load of flooding this year, all across the Midwest, up into the Dakotas. In Matthew, the New Testament, Jesus talking about signs of his return. He has, in one of the verses, he says, when a sign of my return is that it'll be as in the days of Noah. That people had lost their focus on God, and their value systems were all screwed up, and they were basically living to satisfy their own desires. They were living in debauchery and wickedness. And their goals in life were to accumulate wealth here on earth. And basically, God gave them all a warning. He told Noah to start building an ark because he was going to destroy the wickedness. And that's the crazy thing. People didn't know the exact day or the hour, but it was pretty obvious that the end was coming. They could see Noah building an ark, and you know what? They probably just made fun of him, ridiculed him. And that's kind of how it works today. Sure, we got people out there that, are saying the end is near, and they get called crazies, and people laugh at them, But that verse in Matthew, with Jesus saying, it will be as in the days of Noah, I think has a lot of relevance to how we're living today, where our focus is, where our value system is, whether we're following the path of righteousness or whether we're just living to satisfy our own desires and to accumulate our whole lives, whether we know it or not. We're living our lives just to accumulate, going in debt to buy a house, to buy a car, to buy whatever. And whether doing it consciously or unconsciously, our focus is not on our fellow human beings or on God. And, just looking at those verses, I was looking back into Genesis, and, I've been touching on this the last couple of video blogs, but, what appears to me is that there was possible, cross-mating between fallen angels and humans. And it says clearly there were giants in those days. And then it also says there were mighty men of renown. The Nephilim, I do believe they might be hybrids. And, one thing it talks about is that these giants, these mighty men of renown, the Nephilim, they were not only there before the flood, but they were there after the flood. So I think God definitely might have been also trying to, cleanse the planet of the hybrids, but you know what? That didn't happen. So, from before the flood to after the flood, there's been a war being waged. One between the fallen angels in their rebellion, led by Lucifer, otherwise known as Satan, rebelling against God, trying to form a pyramid of power against God down here on earth. And, the fallen angels, they ultimately want mankind to either be enslaved to them, to join their rebellion against God. And one of the things it talks about in Genesis is they will not cleave one to another. So I think that kind of says that they can't actually reproduce. So the net result of that is that's why they also crossbreed with humans. That's how they keep the Nephilim going, is they impregnate humans and produce their offsprings. They were there before the flood. I believe they're there after the flood. And it's clearly shown because one of the stories post-flood, after the flood, after the deluge, is the Tower of Babel. And, Babel itself means confusion. And I think that's what we're living in, days of confusion. And they also talk about Babel being the city ruled by a guy by the name of Nimrod. But Nimrod actually means rebel. So speculation is that Nimrod is actually Gilgamesh. And if you understand the story of Gilgamesh, his whole mission in life was to kill the god that brought the flood. So to me there seems to be a direct correlation, and they actually talk about Gilgamesh being half human and half god, and on his journey he took with him a half beast, half man. And once again, before the flood, and I believe after the flood, doing genetic manipulation is definitely going against God. But anyway, the story of the Tower of Babel is they were trying to build a skyscraper that'd be tall enough so that if God ever flooded the world again, they probably wouldn't get killed. And, it seems like, in my opinion, the flood didn't necessarily kill everybody anyway. Because even though Noah built an ark and he got on board with his 3 sons and their wives, it just seems like there might have been other people that survived somehow, whether it was hiding in caves or on mountaintops. And, once again, when you look at the lineage of Noah after the flood, he had 3 sons, but it was through his son Ham, the one who actually fell out of favor with God, because he made fun of Noah when Noah got drunk. And it was Ham who had a son Cush, who then had a son Nimrod, the rebel, Gilgamesh, who became the first post-flood king, another pyramid of power, in direct opposition to God. And, it kind of states that they had one language, so humans were working as one. And God basically said, when they're united, they could do anything. So the story goes that God destroyed the tower, but he also confused the languages and maybe divided the land, but people kind of separated and went their ways. But, I think what's also kind of clear is that Nimrod and the people of Babel, they weren't worshiping God. They were worshiping the rebel, Lucifer, Satan. And I think it was a mystery, a secret, cloaked. That's how it works. Evil is always cloaked. It doesn't like to be exposed to sunlight, because if people can see evil for what it is, they might actually stand up against it. But if you don't even think it's evil, then why would you be standing against it? You'd probably be sucked into supporting it. And that kind of brings me to today. This morning I watched our president, Obama, give a speech to the veterans, the American Legion. And, I just think he's, when he talks, it's jibber jabber. It's babble, confusing language. Which, once again, as in the times of Noah, confusion, secrecy, things being masked. But, we already know this about Obama. When he talks, it's just like there's double meanings. But since he was talking to the veterans, once again, he, as the government, he promises. He's like, the government will give you everything you need. The government, the government, the government. And then he accuses others of saying that they're going to balance the budget of America on the backs of the veterans, which is a big lie. Nobody wants to do that. And you know what's strange about it? If there's anybody out there that wants to balance the budget on the backs of the veterans, it's the Democratic Party, Obama's own party. They're the ones that want to cut defense. You know? But his whole speech to me was just, confusing. You know, he always promotes himself. You know, he said, I authorized the greatest, secret operation ever to kill Osama bin Laden. And he barely touches on anything that Bush did. Like to him, even mentioning Iraq just seems to be like an afterthought. And you know why? Because he was against everything that happened in Iraq, even though he's doing everything that Bush did in Iraq. And the bottom line is, I don't see any difference between Obama and Bush anyway, because they were probably both kind of working towards the same end goal. Who knows? But, if you look at, what he's talking about, a couple of things. One, he uses the word war. And then, what he never does is frame up what the war actually is. Because the war is good versus evil. But you won't see him ever saying that. Not one word about that. And then what he says is, hey, we're going to end the war. And his whole thinking is, if you just pull out the troops, the war's over. Well, that's a big lie too. Because if it's good versus evil, pulling out our soldiers, that sounds more like a surrender. Which is scary, because dark days are ahead. And then, another thing that was kind of troubling is, he talks about how now soldiers that commit suicide, he gives them a call and talks to their parents and talks about how valiant they were. And you know what, I'm not trying to badmouth anybody, but, there's a difference between losing your life in battle, fighting for a cause, and suicide. But, once again, Obama is always graying the lines of, good versus evil, and confusing us, And then the other thing, like he talks about, electronic forms, like having the VA and the vets and everything online so that they get help immediately. And how, putting everything onto a database and making electronic forms is going to make everything faster and more efficient. But then in the same breath, he says, we're going to hire a ton of people to process the information. Well, it's like, you know what? The way I understand computers is that when you put everything into a database and make it all electronic, you need less people. That's how computers work. Makes things more efficient. So how can he talk about putting in a system, a database to help, and yet he needs to add mess loads of people on top of it all? That don't make sense. Very confusing. The truth is very hard to find. You have to seek to find it nowadays, because it doesn't matter who the hell you're listening to. I had one person, commented to me where he said, hey man, modern archaeology, tells us this, that, or the other thing. And I told him, hey dude, you can't trust modern archaeology, because they're trying to spoon feed us a story they want us to believe, where they find one rotten tooth up in Europe and they come up with a story that we were having sex with Neanderthals. And yet when they find other stuff like the skeletons of giants, or they find technology that shouldn't have existed back then, like they found this clock computer type device in the ocean right in the Mediterranean, and you know what, they just blow it off or hide it. There's an agenda out there, and there's a deception, where we're trying, being told one thing and reality and truth is another. And you got to make sure you're on the right side, because this is war. And you don't want to be on the wrong side, even if you don't know you're on the wrong side. Good and evil exists on both sides of the fence. Like World War II, that was good versus evil. Even though you'll never hear Obama say that. But does that mean all Germans were evil? No. German people, there are a lot of good German people, but there was some really evil German people there too. And the good German people got sucked right up into the diabolical evil of Hitler and the Nazi Party. And likewise in America, America's good, but you know what? There's evil in America too. Ruled by secrecy, the Masons, the frameworks that we see externally are not necessarily representative of what's actually going on. You have to look beyond the smoke and mirrors. You got to step back from the tree and see the forest.